All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So first off, I want to just say welcome to the Portland Sitecore user group. This is the second one that we've been having since kind of revamping it, so hopefully it's been successful so far. First off, before we go into who's presenting and the agenda for tonight, I just want to say if you're looking to present, we're looking for presenters all the time, so just reach out to me via email or Slack or Twitter or whatever way you want to. We're open to potentially doing 45-minute presentations, but also if you're not sure about doing a full-long presentation, then you can definitely go ahead and submit if you want like a 20-minute presentation just talking about what you've been working on with Sitecore and anything interesting. The more presenters we get, the more often we can do these events, which is awesome. So first off, I'd like to note that tonight's event will be recorded and then we'll post it up online somewhere, maybe my YouTube or maybe somewhere else. So just more pressure for those that are presenting. So
thank you.
No problem. The first person up tonight is Jim Petillo. He's a Ambassador MVP. He just got his MVP award, so congratulations.
Thank you.
It takes a lot of work to be MVP, so he definitely knows what it takes, so it's pretty awesome. He's going to be presenting on improving the authoring experience inside and outside of Sitecore, and after that, we're going to take a short break, and then we're going to have presenters Corey Smith and Rick Bauer, which traveled from far away. So I think that's like the main event. They're presenting on JavaScript services, or JSS with marketing automation. So going to be a pretty awesome topic. I've never seen it, so that would be pretty awesome. And then lastly, kind of a throw in at the end, like this morning, was kind of an expert panel where we're going to just have a bunch of different, I was going to say it's MVP panel, but Cam is obviously a Sitecore employee, so. Jeff Cram's going to lead that and ask us various questions. There might be time for anybody in the audience that want to ask any sort of questions. They can go ahead and do that, and hopefully we'll have answers. All right, so that's pretty much it. So we can go ahead, and Jim can go ahead and just get started.
Thank you. Okay. So just to give a little bit of a further introduction, Jim Petillo, I'm a technical consultant at Proficient Digital. I've had a pretty long career spanning website development and marketing, and recently became, as Dylan said, Sitecore Ambassador MVP. I also have 5+ years of moderation experience on the r/Sitecore subreddit, and I'm also on RAEM, but don't tell anybody at Sitecore that. So the reason why we're here today is because every authoring experience is not an idyllic day at the beach. In this presentation, I'm going to go through a couple of little tips that we can walk through that are available for both content authors and some that'll require a little bit of developer and designer help in order to implement. So we'll start with working out inside of Sitecore. So part of getting a content management system is managing your content. And you're going to find that when it comes to improving performance for the authoring experience, the more of a handle you have on managing the content inside of your CMS, the better the performance of the authoring experience is going to be. So the first tip I've got is to organize folder content. So the key thing, the important thing about keeping things organized is that it gives you everything at a glance. You can see where things are, what's missing, what's there, and what is not there, and you have easy access to find the different things that you need to look for. The same is true inside of your folders, inside of the content editor. So we'll take this example case study as an example. If you just enter the content into Sitecore and don't do anything special, Sitecore is just going to provide names for each of the components. And then when it runs across ones that are duplicates, it's going to start adding numbers. That's not really that helpful for anybody. So if you take a little bit of extra effort and start naming the components that you've built with unique names, you can know, like, oh, I need to go in and edit the challenge text, not is it rich text 1, rich text 2, or rich text with no number on it at all. Taking this one step further, if you resort your content to make it match the way that it's presented on the page, if the name isn't exactly 100%, at least they have some sort of visual cue to be able to tell which piece of content it is that they need to go in and edit. And the super bonus, of course, is if you give all of your content, whether it's duplicated or not, a distinct name, because it allows you to use the search to find things in case you need to add those components into other places. The next tip is respect the media library. So a client that I used to work with loved to hand off, they'd go to iStock, they would download the highest resolution, best looking image that they possibly could, do a couple of quick tweaks in Microsoft Paint, and then send me a 300 megabyte image that they needed that was 2,000 by 4,000 to fill a little 800 by 600 banner image. If you do that enough, eventually Sitecore is going to make you pay for that. So optimize your images first before you upload them into the media library. And then again, it's all comes down to managing items that are inside of your media library. So we'll take this example. Obviously in this folder, Mike P, I don't know how he wandered and found his way into the folder, but clearly if you look at all the other content that's in there, he doesn't belong there. The next part shows items that get added into Sitecore underneath as child items of other media items. And this happens a lot with new authors, especially when they start adding content directly from the content editor instead of uploading it into the media library separately. The problem with this is if somebody needs to find Habitat 007, it's nowhere to be found in that folder. So they'll have to go hunting for it somewhere else, or hopefully it's named something good so you can search for it. The problem that this creates is that you wind up having duplicate content that you have spread across multiple folders because people can't find the content that's originally there because it's been miscategorized or misplaced. So Sitecore also gives you the ability to see when something is used or not used and take advantage of that and go through and remove or archive any of the images or media items that are not being used at all. And that will help free up some resources. The next tip I've got is to get control of version control. One thing that I've seen a lot of times with new authors is that they will click the edit button every single time and create multiple versions of content that are not really 100% necessary. So in the first example, you could see that user number 1 has gone through and created 7 additional versions of content over a span of 10 minutes. I doubt anything earth-shattering has been put in that 10 minutes that can't be kept. So you can easily collapse this and reduce it to just having 2 versions. The example next to it shows, I think, the greater sin by user number 1, who just came in and decided, it's okay, and then built another version right on top of the 4 versions that are probably 1 version. These versions, again, add up like cruft in the background, and then Sitecore's indexing them, and it's taking up space, and it's just, going to start at some point degrading your authoring experience and then your Sitecore experience in general. This next tip is going to require a little bit of developer assistance, and that is labeling your fields. So we're going to have this hero image field that's here, and as a new author coming into the system, you have no idea what to put in here. It's a hero image, but I mean, there has to be more to it. You can work with your developer to get them to put a nice description of what's supposed to be there inside of the short description field. And then the next time that you come across this image, come across this field, it's got a description that says, hey, I want this image. The image that goes in here is 1440 by 556. And it also tells people where it's going to show up on the page. In this case, it's going to be up in the header. You can use these label fields for additional reasons beyond just labeling something for image, production-ready images. In the first example, we have something that says in minutes, which suggests that, that a number is what's going to need to be put in that field. The next one gives a kind of better direction for an optional field. So if there's no title that's put in here, Sitecore is going to fall back to the header title and use that instead. And then this last field for description says that it needs to be between 200 and 400 characters, which is good for governance reasons. But sometimes you have marketers that say the perfect thing in 109 characters or 401 characters. So if you put limits on there, they're not going to be able to do that, and they might have to rework what they have. So in my opinion, the best thing to do is to give them a little bit of your trust and just provide them some direction. The next tip I've got is descriptive placeholder images. So we're going to take our hero image again, and there's no placeholder in here. So if I were to open up this page inside of the experience editor, what I'm going to get is the ugly looking, badly sized default Sitecore placeholder image for images, which doesn't really tell me anything. It's not helpful. It kind of blows the page out of proportion, and it could make it really difficult for people to edit. Since you're going to put a placeholder image in there anyway, you can either have a designer go and create one of these images for you, or go to a site like this, fpoimage.com, and give it a couple of parameters to fill out, and then it'll create a nice placeholder image for you. In this particular example, I have it showing what the dimensions of the image are. Hero image says what it is, and then I have the directory that it's going to be placed in inside of the media library, and then last, it even includes a naming convention that you can suggest gets enforced. And then once you have that installed inside of your component or your page, and I'm told developers can do custom validation that will exclude this page from being published if this placeholder is in there and not a real image is put in its stead. So that is there. And then when you actually view the page in the experience editor, now you have a much more accurate representation of what you're going to be editing. And we've even gone so far as to illuminate a hidden field that was in there that you would not have seen or known to look for unless you were familiar with the page itself. There are other visual cues that you can stick inside of Sitecore. In particular, this is a set of components from Habitat that define layouts. So you can see visually, you'll know which 3-column you want and what the breakout of the column width should be, because there's thumbnails in there. So you're taking more than just the words and being able to pick the right item the first time out. The same can be said for some of these renderings. So if I had a question as to whether I wanted to put in the page teaser or the news article teaser, I have a nice little thumbnail that says, oh, this is the one that I need, and I'm able to put it in. One other thing that I've come across in Sitecore is when people, developers put in these little warnings inside of components to indicate that shared content is in use. This is important because it gives the author a little warning, like if you edit this in this one place, you're going to edit it everywhere. I've seen variations on this where developers will lock down the entire component so that it can only be edited inside of the content editor. So in this case, you would not be able to add the case study on this page, but in the content editor, you can pick it from a pick list and add it. And I've seen it taken a step further where the example case study that's shown here is not even accessible unless you're a member of a special role that understands and has the responsibility for making sure that the one piece of content that's going to be shared across the entire site is maintained in a secure fashion where not anyone can just go in and start editing content. So we'll wrap up with a few of the items that are a few tips for handling things outside of Sitecore. The first one, it's kind of important, it's use checklists and content guides. So Ava Liebtag created this creating valuable content checklist way back when, and it's still in use today. You can go to her site and download it and modify it to fit the content strategy of your own company. But this can kind of help determine whether or not you should create something on the site rather than just blindly saying, yes, we need this, let's do it. So it gives you these items to check off on the list to make sure that it's something that you want. Taking that a step further, I've built plenty of content guides to help authors and work with people in the marketing department and other subject matter experts in order to make sure that all the content that you get and handed off to you is everything that you need to build that one component. There have been many times where I've been handed a block of text and they say, here, it's a blog post, run with it. And it's like, it's more to a blog post than just the copy that's on there. There's metadata, there's header images. So having a content guide like this gives people a chance to be a little more thoughtful rather than throwing things at you to put up on the site. And if you align it with the way that the fields are presented in Sitecore, it's easy to copy and paste from one into the other. I've also seen an online version of this with a form that works in, I guess, a better way than the Word document. If all of the form fields aren't filled out, the work request to create the content doesn't get generated. So you're saving a lot of effort and going back and forth to make sure that all the assets and all the parts and pieces required to put one piece of content together are present and available before you even start. The next step I like to call is snitches get riches. So we worked with a client who had been in Sitecore for a very long time. And part of what we did was install insert options into separate directories. When we had done a review of some weird bugs that were happening, we discovered that somehow pages and items that were not in the insert options seemed to have found their way into the other directory, and we didn't know how it was. Well, somebody eventually confessed that what they were doing was creating the item in one folder and then moving it into a place where they could, where it wasn't allowed to be. And so stuff like that didn't get the guy in trouble, but it did inspire a discussion as to how appropriate it would be to have that individual content type as a part of additional section, as an insert option for additional sections of the site, and not something that was only to be used in this one specific instance and nowhere else. And then the last step is take notes and meet, fix stuff and repeat. So a lot of the times you'll just sit there and think this has to be the best that this authoring experience can possibly be. And meanwhile the building is burning down around you. If you see something and have an issue, take notes. Write down what drives you crazy, share it with other content authors and other marketers, and maybe they have the same issues that are there. Taking it a step further, involve the development team and see if there's a way that they can include smoothing out the rough edges of your authoring experience inside of the development cycle if there are spare cycles that are available. And that's all I have for this presentation. So thank you very much for allowing me to present.
All right, we have a few minutes, just take a break, and then next up will be Corey and Rick. So grab some pizza, grab some beer, and whatever.
All right. That's me and Corey. Yes. And so is this. Interestingly enough, I realized today that this picture of me is 4 years old. It took that long to grow the mustache, so I'm gonna have to go get a new picture soon. But I'm Corey Smith, 3-time Sitecore MVP and independent Sitecore consultant. Rick and I gave this presentation at Sitecore Symposium back in October, and yeah, presenting with Rick.
And similarly but differently, my picture is about 10 years old, so a few things have changed since then. Site Cordial on Twitter, and I am privileged to work with the JSS Gold Master himself, Corey Smith, on this presentation. So yeah, we spent some good time on this for Symposium, and we figured we'd make the big money on the road. So here
or spend big money on the road.
spend big. Oh, did that wrong.
So again, we did this symposium whenever Sitecore was first announcing the general availability of JavaScript services and Ken Figge's hard work on the product. So that site that you guys just interacted with was built on JSS with React, and we built that really to prove out that you can go ahead and start building your sites with JSS today, right? Cam's built a very nice, well-tested product for Sitecore. You can use this in place of MVC, get all the same features that you know and love with MVC, your personalization, your marketing automation, et cetera, et cetera. It's ready to go. The site proves it. We're going to talk a bit about it during this presentation. Anything to add, Rick?
I would add that one of the first things that I noticed when we were working with this product is the native client-side speed that you get with it, both just on the authoring side of it, in Sitecore, and also when just traversing the site. Just Corey will touch on this a little bit, but just the way it handles reloading the page, et cetera, is noticeably different. And I'm going to be repeating this tirelessly throughout this, but one of the things I want to be talking about is like the completeness of solution from a Sitecore author and a strategist standpoint. What came visibly clear on this is just how complete everything inside Sitecore feels built off JSS.
Yep. So before we dive into JSS, let's talk a little bit about the history of rendering engines in Sitecore, because this is one of the big things that JSS is, right? It's kind of a replacement rendering engine. So XSLT, does everybody know it? Has everybody used it? Anybody still using it today in this room? No, you're not. There is actually one guy in New Zealand who still uses it today.
Are you
He claims it's a quick prototyping tool, but I know he ships it to production as well. So, of course, there's web forms. Hopefully, nobody's doing new sites on that, but probably lots of maintenance still out there. And then MVC, which is kind of the new hotness until JSS came along. They've got one thing in common, right? Like at the end of the day, as a developer, we prefer MVC probably, unless you're Bruce in New Zealand. Just better unit testing, et cetera, et cetera. Are you here for the front end? Wrong room. We're talking front end though. All right, come back. Yeah.
We're losing him.
We're losing him. Also front end? No. Oh, okay. Yeah. I offended his friend. Yeah, so kind of the common thread between these three, right? Like as a developer, we prefer to develop on MVC, but as a browser of your client sites, it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, they're all a server-side rendering engine. So XSLT, web forms, it doesn't matter. It's all just generating an HTML document that gets sent up to the browser, right? Which has served us well for a while, but over the past decade and certainly over the past 5 years, there's been kind of a movement away from server-side rendering to client-side rendering. And that's where JSS comes into play, because it lets us do this client-side rendering native on Sitecore using one of the three frameworks that you see pictured here, either Angular, Vue, or React. So these are kind of the three big client-side rendering frameworks today. They've all got huge communities, which is pretty cool, probably bigger than the Sitecore communities.
Not bigger than the front-end community.
Not bigger than the front-end community. We're going to get those guys back over here soon, though.
Yeah.
I think they're going to get interested in this.
They're going to get bored over there.
But with the client-side development model, so instead of the server actually generating that HTML document, now your server is just acting as an API layer, right? Sitecore is just sending JSON to the browser, and Angular, Vue, or React is taking that and it's actually generating the HTML for you. And that lets your browser do a lot of cool things like not re-render the entire page every time you click on a new link, right? So like on that page that you guys just, or that site that you guys were just interacting with, the footer's content was the same on every single page that you went to, right? React's got a mechanism so that even though Sitecore is returning that footer data on each page click, it's never re-rendering that footer. So that makes the page feel a lot faster. And React gets really, really specific on the parts of the page that it re-renders, right? So it's not like it's re-rendering the entire footer component when the footer data changes. It'll re-render only the parts of the footer that need to get re-rendered based on new content. So as Rick was saying, it just makes your sites feel a lot faster. And if you put an MVC site and a JSS site right next to each other, you can feel the difference. Like your grandma can feel the difference, right? She doesn't know what they are, but she'll be able to tell which site feels faster. And I honestly think that today, this is how you should be building your sites, not on MVC anymore. And I think that the jokes we're making about XSLT and web forms today, we're going to be making about MVC in a couple of years and saying, you know, if you're building your sites on MVC, you're doing it wrong. It needs to be done on JSS. It's just that much better. And not only is the experience better for your users, but it's about to be better for front-end developers, right? So I've worked with Mike Ward here. He's a front-end developer, and he's lamented several times about how bad it is developing in Visual Studio, and I've heard it from other developers as well. JSS actually comes with a killer feature called disconnected mode that lets you get away from Sitecore, right? So Sitecore, can we turn off the camera? Wait. All right, my microphone's off. Yeah. Sitecore is a bit slow, right? Even the content editor, the experience editor, it's all a bit slow. So even if you're making content changes, right, that workflow of publishing to see the content changes, it's slow. Disconnected mode lets you take Sitecore completely out of the picture. There's no more building a Visual Studio solution to publish your new components whenever you're making changes to that code. It's all really fast. It's running on Node, so it's not running on Sitecore, of course. It's just mocking the response that comes back from Sitecore. And that lets you do cool things like run it on a Mac, right? So Mike, you probably prefer developing on a Mac over a Windows machine, right? So there you go with disconnected mode, no more Windows machine or VM required. Or if there are any interesting people here that like developing on Linux, you can do that too. It doesn't really matter. It's just running on Node. So let's hop over into disconnected mode real quick and see what that looks like.
Corey, while you're hopping, you started out with React, right?
Yep.
That was a preference, and then while we've been talking, you said you kind of...
Oh, we don't do this part with Cam in the room.
How much you love React?
Yeah, I love React. No, actually, so I built a site on React. The only reason I did it was just because the site was built whenever we were, or JSS was in technical preview 3 or 4, I think. The first framework that they built it on was with React, so I was like, you know, if I need to get support, probably the JSS team is more familiar with that. But today, all 3 frameworks have feature parity. So it doesn't matter if you're building on Vue or if you're building on Angular or React, you're going to get all the same features. You're not giving up anything. But what Rick's kind of alluding to is I chose React, again, just to chat with the JSS team. But I think if I were doing this again today, as a purely Sitecore-focused developer, just because I'm lazy, I only really want to learn one framework, I'd probably go back and do it again in Angular. Just because a lot of the stuff that's, I knew it. See, this is why I didn't want to do it with him in the room.
It's good, it's honest.
Yeah, it's honest.
You got to purge, you got to get it out.
Speak is built on Angular, right? New modules that Sitecore builds are going to be on Angular as well. So it's like, look, as a Sitecore developer, I want to be able to extend the CMS. I don't want to learn multiple frameworks. Cam, he's giving me bad stares. He's like,
it's worth noting that this is supporting Angular 7.1, whereas Speak is still on Angular 4.
Okay.
So there's
worth noting. So you've still got to learn more than one. But going forward, it'll probably be
I would not assume that you would need to know Angular to extend Sitecore.
Okay, so I'm changing the talk right now. What would you choose?
Anything but Angular.
Anything but Angular, okay. So what you're saying is that like if we want to be Sitecore focused, just live with the fact that we're going to have to learn multiple frameworks probably.
Really, the aim is to have the team that's doing the implementation in JSS choose the framework they're most familiar with.
Sure.
So we try to support the ones that they want. But you know, statistically speaking, in terms of the support requests we get, they're 80% Angular.
Interesting.
Because it seems to like to break and do it in interesting ways with terrible error messages quite often. So that's why.
So Cam says don't use Angular. Yeah.
No, it has a lot of appeal, especially for a traditional backend developer with internal control and dependency injection and all that stuff. It feels familiar. It's just it's so heavy.
Yeah.
Like you're adding another 200K on your page weight just because you chose Angular. I'm not joking at all. 200K.
No, and I mean, to that point, it's like whenever I was looking at the documentation for building components in Angular, right, Google's documentation is like create 7 files for one component, whereas React is like create 1. It's like, which would I prefer to do, right? I don't want to make 7 files. I'm sure that they've got some benefit, but I mean, to Cam's point, I think probably the most important thing is just whatever your client or your team is most familiar with is what you should choose. But anyways, thanks for that digression, Rick.
Yeah,
you're
happy
responsible. So yeah, let's step into disconnected mode real quick and take a look at it. So I know it's really small over here on the left side, but this is running against localhost 3000, right? So this is running against Express and Node. This isn't running in IIS, and this is exactly the same site that you guys just interacted with, running away from Sitecore, which is pretty cool. It's a fully content-driven site, so this isn't like a static mock-up. Right? We can click around. This is everything that you saw whenever you were interacting with the site, except you'll notice one thing right here that the music form isn't rendering. So disconnected mode, again, since it's not running against Sitecore, it doesn't have access to all the things that you need, like marketing automation, personalization, that's not there. If you really want to be adventurous, you could probably implement that in disconnected mode, but I wouldn't recommend it necessarily. But this is just a really good way for your front-end developers to quickly get your site prototyped, right? Like they can build out 90% of your site in disconnected mode. They don't need a Sitecore instance. It's really fast. So like we can just go and change some content in this site. We'll go here on the home page and we can look at the heading here. Let me go back to the home page real quick. We'll change the heading to I love JSS, save that. And the content's ready, right? Like you can't do that with Sitecore. Even like in live mode, directly against the master database, it's not that fast. But that's just updating content. I mean, updating components is the same way, right? Like if I go and change one of these components, like change its kind of backend code, quote unquote, it's the exact same way. It's hot refresh. So that's pretty cool. You can't really see it just because of the colors. I should probably switch over to light mode. Let's see, change theme. See if that's a little bit better. How does that look? Can you read that better?
I think that's a little better, yeah.
So since you're not working against Sitecore, when you're working in disconnected mode, you're working against YAML files. Unsurprisingly, the creator of Unicorn and Rainbow, you had a hand in this, right? With the decision. You can use JSON as well, but YAML is probably better just because multi-line support is much better in YAML, and you can do comments as well, which you can't do in JSON. But this looks a lot like an item, right? It's got an ID. You can use a string instead of a GUID if you like. Strings are just easier to work with, right? Whenever you're doing this kind of stuff. You can have item level fields or route level fields as they're called in disconnected mode. These are just like page fields in Sitecore, and then placeholder is where you define your components. So yeah, this is different than Rainbow though, right? So they're not like cross-compatible. You can't dump Rainbow files into here and expect them to just work from Sitecore, which is another thing to touch on. So I mentioned before that, right, whenever you're working here in disconnected mode, this is kind of a limited subset of Sitecore. You're just getting the content side of things. You're not getting the marketing automation, the personalization. At some point, Rick's going to come along and say, hey, I think your site looks good enough. You prototyped it well. I'm ready to get my hands on this, do content entry. I want to do personalization. I want to do my marketing automation. And so at that point, you can actually run a command with the JSS command line tools to import all these YAML files into Sitecore. Not just the YAML files, but like your renderings, your templates, all that stuff. It'll push that, create those items for you in Sitecore, and you're ready to go. But once you do that, there's no going back, right? So there's no export feature. There used to be one. I think it was taken out, and it was last in Tech Preview 3, and then in Tech Preview 4, they took it out. You can talk to Cam later and tell him how much you're unhappy about that if you are. But I think once you go to connected mode, it's going to be kind of difficult to keep your content in sync between those two, right? Like once your content authors are actually getting there and putting in content, you can keep working in disconnected mode like your front-end developers can, but I don't think you should ever have any expectation that they'll be able to keep their content in sync without doing manual heavy lifting. There's not... a lot of people ask about this whenever I do the presentations, like what's this workflow going to look like? Because disconnected mode is so nice, right? We want our front-end developers to be able to do it. I don't know. I don't have a good answer. I mean, what do you think, Cam? Like once you go to connected mode, do you think that's it? Like disconnected mode is pretty much done? Is that the expectation?
Because you're going from like a prototyping framework up to a full fidelity CMS, you can't really go the opposite direction. Like that's why there's no export. Because unless you rebuild all of Sitecore in JavaScript, which is ridiculous.
Sitecore.js.
Yeah, exactly. There's no way for us to take everything you can do in Sitecore and represent that inside of JavaScript.
Right.
So we went with getting rid of the ability to export in favor of features like being able to share data sources to let you make it easier to author stuff disconnected. So basically, think of disconnected mode as your prototyping framework where you're putting things together to make sure they work. Then after you've imported it and after the content authors take advantage of it, at that point, you probably need to Sitecore instance. Just because at that point, you need that full fidelity stuff.
Mm-hmm. And at that point, your front-end developers hate Sitecore development again, right?
Or else
They got to get a Windows machine or a shared instance, right? Right.
And we've got some interesting things coming that here at SUGCon later. We'll present on some stuff like that.
Oh. Ooh. So go to SUGCon.
Yes.
Yep. So that's disconnected mode. I mean, is there anything that anybody wants to see? We've got a few minutes. I mean, hot reloading, I think, is just the coolest, right? Like just being able to come in here and just type some content, save this file, and then just see that change there immediately. That's really cool.
Spell checker.
Spell checker. There's no spell checker, but I'm sure that you could pull in a npm package. What's that? Yeah.
Dreamweaver? Is that what we're in?
So yeah, at some point, as we're talking about, you're going to move from disconnected mode to connected mode. You're going to be done with this. Rick wants to get his hands on it, do some marketing automation and personalization. So at this point, Rick, I want to take over and
I want to do
show
Sitecore.
off. Yeah, you want to do Sitecore.
I want to do the Sitecore. All right, so why is the strategist here talking about JSS? It's that marketing automation piece. How do the two work together? And I'm going to continue on the analogy that if you went to our website, you see like the concert series, so I stick with that usually. But where I'm the stage, I'm not the star, I'm the stage, Goldmaster, stick with me. Where I'm the front end of the stage, Corey is backstage. He's where the dressing room and the party happens. He's got the mini bar and everything. He's got the mustache. So, I'm just trying to marry. I'm trying to marry the journey that anyone front-end developer and Sitecore developer are working through and what matters to the marketer. And again, completeness of the solution that you'll see. But where have we been? So we're just gonna do little guideposts with me along the way. You came into a website and there's this little campaign ID right here. So the Sitecore campaign ID, this was how we were tracking to the campaign from one of those 3 URLs. We're already knowing a little something about you. I'm going to tie to that a little deeper, but just to show you, we can obviously have different campaigns, and there's a campaign code that is generated right here. So that is what you saw in the URL, but we can build this out a little deeper. And this is everything I'm showing you now is what I can do as a marketer. I want to be able to drive further analytics. So certainly I can drive personalization and gather information, but there's also right up above here, there is a set of classifications, and these are facets and campaign groups and channels. All of that is something that can be built right here in taxonomies. So this is something that can be defined out. I can build out, these are all something that I built out with the events. So we have symposium. No matter where we're speaking, I can have MVP Summit, even Akshay's house. Not only can I tie data, but I can tie photos. I can have all this stuff. And this, this is information that can ultimately be pulled into analytics. Again, do we need that stuff to be able to decide, what's working or not? No, but for the marketers and the people that are trying to purchase the solution, make the decision, we want that completeness of solution, and JSS provides that. And this entire solution you'll see throughout the presentation, you'll see that completeness. So again, recapping, you came in through a campaign, all that data is now tied to facets, and there's analytics being driven, and that's all kind of processing in the background. But now as a marketer, I want to know more about you. And how do I do that? A form. So this is all fine and good. Sitecore Forms, the new Sitecore Experience Forms, I think is the official title, is fantastic, drag and drop, and wonderful. It is not quite, I don't know how ready, or if it is not currently JSS compatible. So soon. So soon it will be compatible. But until then, someone like the JSS Gold Master, Corey Smith, was able to build that out.
Yeah.
Corey?
Yeah, so as Rick said, no Sitecore form support. So a lot of the things that we take for granted with Sitecore forms, like submit actions, stuff like that, we've got to do it ourselves, which isn't that big of a deal.
For soon.
Until soon, right? So if you're thinking about doing JSS, you hold off until 9.2 and get that Sitecore form support. But if you want to go ahead and dive into it today, there are a few things that I wanted to go over that could trip you up whenever you're doing custom forms. And even with Sitecore forms, there may be a case where you want to do custom forms, right? The first one being the analytics cookie. So this is kind of the heart of Sitecore's personalization engine. Right, whenever you browse the site, you get a cookie, and Sitecore is using that to identify you and track all of your behavior. If you've worked in MVC, then you've probably seen this HTML helper, the visitor identification. This is responsible for giving you that cookie and also for watching your mouse movement to see if you're a robot or not. How would you do it? Okay. So there's an equivalent of that whenever you're working in JSS world. This component in React and Vue does exactly the same thing. Angular has something similar, but I didn't put it here just because the semantics are a bit different. You don't really need to worry about this, actually, because so if you've heard of Habitat, you know that the community tells you do not use Habitat as a starter kit for your Sitecore sites. JSS comes with 3 sample apps, one for Angular, Vue, and React, that are considered starter kits, right? You're expected to start, Kim's giving a thumbs up over there, you're expected to start building your sites on top of those sample apps. The layout in each one of those sample apps is going to have this built in for you. So, I mean, unless you're building a custom layout or something like that, you're probably never even going to have to worry about this visitor identification component, but it is good to know that it's there. Now, as Rick mentioned, that form, we want to take that form data and process it on the server. And whenever you're taking form data back, your marketers want you to identify the person who's submitting the form data, because as of Sitecore 9, anonymous data is kind of useless, right? Sitecore 9 doesn't index anonymous data by default. You can turn that on, but it's always better to have your users identified, and this is the way you do it, right? Using the tracker current session identify as. The trick is you have to have the cookie present for this to work. So Rick and I found this out the hard way on a Saturday.
All Saturday.
All Saturday, Rick was sitting in Milwaukee drinking scotch. I was sitting in Atlanta, like sweating. What the hell's going on? I don't know why this isn't working. So when you're working in JavaScript land, one of the popular ways to send data back to the server is through a fetch call, right? Using the fetch API. By default, fetch does not send cookies back to the server, and that's bad. So that's what we were seeing with Rick. I didn't know if you don't include this property credentials same origin, or there's another one where you don't care about same origin, the cookies aren't sent back. So what we were seeing is that Rick would go and he'd submit the form, and like I would see on the server side, oh, you know, somebody's getting identified as Rick. But then whenever he'd browse around the site, none of the personalization was taking effect. And that's because we were leaving that property off. Sitecore didn't know who it was actually identifying, and it wasn't responding appropriately for his subsequent requests. So keep that in mind. If you use Axios, that's a popular library to use for making API calls back to the server. It's got something similar. I think it's use credentials. Is that what the property is, or something like that? Yeah, include credentials or something like that. But the starter kits for JSS, the sample apps, they all come with a data fetcher helper class that you can use, or a helper script. That helper script uses Axios and actually will, by default, send the cookies. So if you use that, you don't really have to worry about this. But still, if you want to use fetch, and there are some good uses for fetch, keep this in mind. Otherwise, it's going to cause you headaches. The next thing is cross-site request forgeries. So this is a vulnerability on forms that used to be in the OWASP top 10 up until I think about 2013. It's not there anymore because a lot of frameworks in response to this have developed mitigations, right? Like MVC has the anti-forgery token, which you can see in this form here. And basically the way that this works to prevent CSRF attacks is this puts a hidden input on the form, and it sends your browser a cookie. And then you can add this validate anti-forgery token attribute on your controller actions, and this makes sure that whenever the form data is posted back to the server, that those two agree. And if they do, it processes the data. And if they don't agree, it returns an unauthorized response. Unfortunately, there's nothing like this in JSS at the moment, but if you want to take note of this URL, it'll take you to a very long blog post that I wrote on how to implement anti-forgery tokens in JSS and use the MVC or Web API validators to validate that stuff. So this is a good thing to keep in mind. You don't want to put forms out on the web that don't have CSRF protection on them. It's a bad idea, especially if they're doing stuff like moving money through a bank or something like that. It's pretty bad. So
It's a good blog post to read on the way to SUGCon.
or before you go to bed.
Not enough time.
Put you to sleep. So last but not least, Rick's favorite.
GraphQL, the world's best select statement. So this is an open source data query and manipulation language for APIs. Corey, I was thinking, I want to say it's going to replace REST, but I don't know where you are on that.
Yeah, we still need rest, right? It's important. We need our sleep. But for everything else, there's GraphQL, right?
Yeah, we got to work on that bit.
Yeah, we need to work on that.
By the way, do you kind of feel like Chuck and Nancy, like the little one podium? All right, sorry, go.
You're getting too political.
It's not political. I keep moving you away,
Get away from me, Rick. Yeah, so GraphQL, graph query language, this is pretty exciting. I feel like as a developer on Sitecore, we're kind of behind the curve sometimes, right? Like MVC, I think, came out from Microsoft in around 2008 or 2009. Sitecore didn't even give that to us until 2014. So if you were a dedicated Sitecore developer, you're watching that on the sidelines and you're like, you know, why am I still doing web forms? My skills are atrophying. This is pretty new, and we're already seeing it on the platform in Sitecore. Like Rick said, some people are making bold claims that GraphQL is going to completely replace REST APIs, that we're not going to be doing those anymore, that it's going to be all GraphQL going forward. You can do a lot of really cool stuff with it. As I said, it's included with JSS, but we're going to focus on one use case that I think most all of us are going to run into whenever we're working with JSS, and that's with transforming data.
Don't write this down.
Yeah, so don't write this down. You're not supposed to see what this is. But as I was talking about earlier, on that form, in Sitecore forms, you can use submit actions to trigger outcomes or goals whenever a form is submitted, right? But without Sitecore forms, we have to implement that ourselves in some way. So basically what I did for Rick to make that easier for him is on the data source for the music form, I put two fields, one where you could select goals, one where you could select outcomes, and that would be triggered whenever the form was submitted. I was pretty surprised to see that the first time I loaded up that component, this is all the data that's coming back for one outcome, and that's all the data that's coming back for one goal. If you've worked with the XConnect API, you know that you only need one piece of data to trigger an outcome or a goal, and that's the GUID of that outcome or goal, right? So I don't want this stuff going back to the browser, first of all, because it's unnecessary data, right? Most of it's not going to get used.
I don't want my outcome monetary value or my picture of Akshay.
Exactly. You don't you don't want somebody to be able to inspect what picture Rick is using to pretty up the experience profile or how much monetary value is being associated with the outcome that you're triggering. So GraphQL comes in and it makes it easier for us to do that, right? In the MVC world, we've got controllers where this is a pretty easy problem to solve. You just pick off the IDs, put that on your view models, and then go. But since we're not using MVC, we need another way, and that's where GraphQL comes in.
Corey, can you show us this inside Sitecore?
Why, yes, I can. Thanks for asking, Rick.
You're welcome.
So to set the stage for it, let's just go back to the music form. So we'll go here under the content tree. Again, all this content that you see here, except for this email node, all this stuff was generated by the import process, right? So I didn't create any of these items. This is all the JSS import process, which is pretty cool. Rick put the content in, thankfully. But we'll go down here to the survey page, and we've got a data source for the music form. So if we scroll down, let's collapse the ribbon. Yep, you can see there's the goals field and the outcomes field. Rick picked one of those.
A little pick lists. Yep.
So now we can go over to the music form rendering, and I'll show you some cool new stuff with JSS. So we dig through 30 layers of Helix folders.
Oh. My camera's
so the first thing that you'll notice is that we're not working with controller renderings, right? Because it's not MVC. So instead, in the JSS world, you'll work with a JSON rendering, which is a little bit different. So there's no controller and action name, which you might be used to. There's just a component name. But we'll scroll down a little bit, and to continue with the talk, there's a new section here called GraphQL, and this is where the GraphQL magic comes into play. So you can actually put an entire GraphQL query here, and then whenever Sitecore is processing your component and sending that data up, like the data source data up to the browser, it'll run this query and transform your data almost like it was a controller. And the really cool thing is there's something called the XGraph browser, that if we click on that, we can go and start playing with it, right? Because I don't know GraphQL. I'm assuming that probably most people in the room, except for Cam, don't either. And so in this graph browser, you can actually like kind of play around with it. It's got IntelliSense. So like if we go down to the goals, you can see here, it's kind of a bad feature request, themes in the GraphQL browser. But yeah, you can see here for goals, I'm just selecting target IDs. For outcomes, I'm just selecting target IDs. But what if you wanted to select other stuff, right? So you can go to target items, and you can see that we're getting IntelliSense. It's kind of guiding me along. And then in target items, it gives you a whole list of stuff that you could return for each one of the goals. So if you wanted, you could return, the ID, what icon I chose, whether or not that goal has children. And before we run this query, we need to give it a little bit of data. So it needs the context item, and it needs the data source item that you want the query to execute against. So we'll just go back here in the content tree. We'll go to the R&B survey page. We'll get that music form. Select the paths. So that's the path to the survey page for the context item. That's the path to the data source item. Execute that, and then you can see over on the right side the result of executing that query. Right? So now you can see that goals, like if we were actually processing this in our JSS app, this is the stuff that would be coming back. So that's pretty cool. I think that's going to be one of the main use cases a lot of us are going to run into whenever we're working with GraphQL for the first time. There's a lot of other really cool stuff you can do with it. You can define your own GraphQL endpoints. You can go crazy. But again, I think that for most of us, just getting our feet wet, this is going to be what we're doing. One other thing that I'll say is that this graph browser, it has a comment up at the top that you can't see. If you edit this, it doesn't automatically update the rendering for you right away, right? So you've actually got to copy this query, go back over here to the rendering, paste that in the field, and then that's ready to go. Another feature request, that'd be.
If you want to get serious about this stuff, there's Visual Studio extensions, and you can put a GraphQL endpoint file on your stuff. And you can basically do the same thing you're doing in the next graph browser inside of VS Code with basically a config file pointing to your endpoint. So like if you're authoring GraphQL files with the JavaScript, you might as well be able to do that and validate it into your schema with VS Code.
But GraphQL is not supported in disconnected mode, right? There's zero support for GraphQL in disconnected mode, so just keep that in mind once you want to start doing that out of the box. If you want to build it.
GraphQL schema mocking tools. In fact, Gary Winnicker has been messing with stuff in the JSS channel the last few days. He's got GraphQL tools mocking a GraphQL schema in disconnected mode. So
Sitecore MVP Gary Winnicker will have a blog post out for you soon on how to use GraphQL in disconnected mode. Breaking news. So we're taking you through all this just to kind of talk about some of the challenges that we ran into with building forms, but kind of taking it full circle, why do we build the forms? And that's to get data about you and do weird and creepy things with your data.
That's exactly right. That's why I got into marketing. Okay, so we're gonna go, again, that whole full circle here. I just want to see what we accomplished from a marketing standpoint with this. You may recognize some familiar names on the left side of this screen. We're probably all pretty familiar with Sitecore Analytics. I think one of the under talked about from a marketing standpoint is the experience profile, and especially when we're talking about like Sitecore Connect and the ability to tie things to CRMs like Salesforce. It's a very powerful tool. So again, this is data that we got from probably 30 seconds of each of your time on a site. Imagine a repetitive data over time. So just when we're going through this, look how much data we have just from moments, right? So we've got the timeline, which actually working with Corey on a previous project, he came up with some really cool iconography in the timeline. That was pretty awesome. But here we got some results. We can see email events sent. I think we can see email event read somewhere, right? Or just, oh, Charles. All right, so you have emails, but yeah, so we're seeing campaigns. We're doing some profiling on you. We're doing some campaign tracking. Again, so here's something that isn't going to change whether you're, selling more lattes that week or selling more frappuccinos, but it's the ability to see on the user that what used to be the gray and other gray silhouette that is in the Sitecore experience profile converted into an image of some sort. In some cases, it can be an image. In some cases, it'll be this, which we're going to talk about. But there's an easy solution that Corey was able to find using the world of WordPress, or WordPress related, I should say. So here we go.
Yeah. So for privacy reasons, services like Facebook and LinkedIn aren't going to let you just go and hit their APIs with an email address and get back a picture. I don't want them doing that. You probably don't want that either. But if you've ever registered for a WordPress blog or you signed up for Gravatar like Jeff has, that's actually a service that lets you do just that. You can associate an image with your email address, and this is an easy integration to do in the experience profile. As Rick said, it's not crazy or anything, but it just makes this a bit more fun for your marketers.
Well, and connected with Salesforce, now your salesperson sees the image, et cetera. So it just becomes more familiar.
Actually, I do want to ask, how many people have done stuff with the experience profile and showcase that to clients? What do they think about it?
For me, they always thought, hey, that sounds good. We should do that eventually.
constant, right? I mean, and I feel like that, add in Sitecore, we should do that. And that's kind of the message I'm trying to get across is with what we've been able to do with JSS and being able to take this and some of these other tricks like Gravatar, it's pretty powerful, because what I'm trying to do out there is convince marketers, you're going to love this. It's going to do this, then, and it's always like, yeah, we'll get there. It's always getting them to that next step. So I find that the quickest way to get them to the next step is to excite them with a current one. Like get them tracking the campaign ID, get that data going, so they start saying to their C-suite, look what I did. And that gets other teams excited and gets them on board. So little things like images actually make that difference. It gets people kind of excited to say, hey, look, that $100,000 Kickstart project that I just did. There. Oh.
So actually what I was going to say is I did this for a client, and
is that your beekeeper beard?
I did this
I like
for a
it.
client, and I got really excited because I was like, man, I can't wait to show this off to them. Like, I've never done full experience profile support before. And we got in the meeting, and I showed this to them, and they're like, you need to shut that off. This is like really weird. We don't like this. So I was like, why can't I cycle it? That's kind of one of the big things that you bought it for. So I don't know. I thought that was interesting. They were like really turned off by it. But yeah, anyway, so kind of going back to Gravatar real quick. The cool thing about it is, as you saw before, people who haven't signed up for Gravatar, it actually lets you request instead like a unique image for their email address that's unique across any service that uses Gravatar. So Dylan's Gravatar will look like that if some other service uses RoboHash. I think that's neat. And it's totally unique, right? Nobody else is going to look like that. And
unique and persistent.
Unique and persistent, yeah. So.
Is there a way, and I never even thought about this too, always do RoboHash instead of the image? Talk about your creepy factor. Is there a way you could just force the hash? Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. But yeah, okay, so again, the point of this is a lot of data, very little amount of time. And then to take this a little bit further, here we can, so we'll go right to the automation. We use the new marketing automation tool. So if you went through the site, I hope you did, you'll see right now on the automation, there's this little decision point that says was indecisive. And when you went to the site, if you got to the form page, there was an opportunity for you to change your mind. So you chose country and you went, wait, no, I hate country. I want to pick rock or whatever it is, So you can get to that point and say, yes, I'm indecisive. Admittedly, this was just to showcase some of the automation. And also, admittedly, left and right sides are rock, country, R&B. I could have tokenized the emails, I could have personalized the emails, and basically not made this so complex. But the reason I did this is I wanted to show off something that I find exciting from a usage standpoint. That's that report view. So in report view, you can actually, I'll call it near real time from what I've witnessed, see activity. So the top number is user in the state, bottom number user through the state. Typically we see usually rock heavy, decisive rock heavy. So I mean, through the tour that we've been on over, I think about 11, 12, 13 of these now, it always tends to be, we're seeing data come in. We don't keep it, but we know that it's always rock decisive is always the winner. So we're learning something, but the point is, along the way, again, this is a small sample size, right? Imagine 200,000 people going through automation. This is an email automation. It could be other forms of automation, and I can watch that data flow through. So now I can look for possibilities for changes. I can, just excite my user to want to use the platform and use the automation. So especially with the drag and drop tool and what's available, it's now very exciting to see what's happening. So in here, we went email and marketing list. Again, we'll only send it out to cell phone carriers. That's the only place we're sending your data, as promised earlier.
Mortgage lenders.
And mortgage lenders, yes. So those are the only two places we'll send it. So we're capturing the list. But the other thing we wanted to show, again, in that whole completeness of solution thing was the using EXM. And this is the thing that Corey said, don't talk about this in front of Cam. But we were able... Oh, okay. All right. It's good to talk about things controversial. All right. So Corey was able to set up the EXM, and I was able to actually build the emails in the experience editor, and basically execute on the promise of EXM. And you'll see that the React tools are actually, there you go.
Has anybody done email HTML? No one? Like HTML just for emails.
Have you suppressed it? Is that what's happened in the room? That you?
Yes. It's like going back to 1999, 20 nested tables just to do your layout. It's awful. So of course, since it's like such, so ancient, there's not going to be JavaScript support for the email client, partially for security reasons, but just it hasn't advanced. So I say all that to say that React, Angular, and Vue are not going to run in an email client. But the way that JavaScript services works is the very first request you make to a site, just going in on a regular URL, is actually going to be server-side rendered. So Sitecore can run a node process that will process your JSS application, render that into an HTML, and return that as a document. Subsequent requests as you browse around the site are just API calls to the layout service. We can take advantage of that with EXM to actually use React or Angular or Vue to build your email applications and send emails, because the way that EXM works is whenever it's doing the marketing automation, it's just basically taking your email address, it's going and figuring out which content item from Sitecore it needs to email, it renders that, and then sends that to an email, like the HTML, right? So we can do that with React or Vue or Angular, whatever. That's what I've done here. Built a React app. Whenever EXM runs, it's just doing the server-side rendering and shipping that email off to you. So you're not the why this was a React app that was driving it, but just kind of an interesting proof of concept. I don't know if you'll get support from Sitecore for doing it. I would probably never do it again, to be honest with you. It was quite painful. I'd probably just do straight HTML. But yeah, that's kind of cool. It's got full experience editor support, so yeah, that was cool.
So I mean, that's the full journey that we took you through, why I asked you to kind of start on that site. And then ultimately at Symposium, this is where we drew the winner. We're still gonna, I think there's a Sitecore hat. Dylan, is that what you, is that? All right. Either, or a tub of Clorox wipes. You pick. But this was actually now continuing that process of you connecting with XConnect. And so Corey built a console app that.
I'll try to make the font size bigger for this tiny.
So you don't, you'll also get bragging rights. There are but 21 people in this world that will get to win the JSS Marketing Automation Roadshow honor.
All right, here we go.
No cash value.
So the whole site is running in Azure, and this is just a console app that's running off the XConnect. It's pulling down a list of all the people that participated today. It's going to roll over them, send your email address off to mortgage lenders, and then it's going to randomly choose one of you to be the winner. So
was there a Corey's mustache or anything like that in the list?
No, there wasn't.
Right.
There was a Mr. I don't know what
okay.
that is.
That's a band.
Well, there it is. Chaz the Chaz. Cam Bruce Biggie, I know that's not a real person.
We have a winner.
Who's it going to be?
Willie Nelson. Is he here?
Select again.
Do you have it written into the code to eliminate the previous?
No, I don't. I was just thinking about that. That'd be really funny.
Dylan. Well, how about that? Congratulations, you win a box of Clorox wipes.
So Dylan, what we'd like to see you do is wear that hat during the MVP panel at the end.
I feel like we're winners.
Right? All right, cool.
We will tweet it out with your email address. No, we will block that.
Okay.
But yeah, so thank you to the Portland SUG, and thank you to ConnectiveDX for hosting. We've had a lot of fun continually touring, and every one of these is awesome. So again, thank you for hosting. Profession Digital is on there. They basically supported Corey and I when we worked together there during the process of building out this whole presentation. And then a big thank you to our friend Raja. And Corey, you want to talk about the Docker piece?
Yeah, so the site's actually running on Docker, which is pretty cool. That's one of the things that JSS lets you do, is it's going to introduce some new architectures, right? It's not just CM and CD anymore. Now you can put a proxy running in Docker in front of your CDs. So that's kind of cool. I don't know Docker, but my friend Raja does, and he helped me put this together for the symposium presentation. So it's like, go big or go home, right? We're going to use JSS. Let's use it to the fullest. So big thanks to him.
Questions, either now or a panel.
How do we talk our clients into using it?
Wait until SXA support is there. That's what I say.
That's fair.
No.
Now in Angular.
In Angular. Liar. All right, cool. Thanks for having us, guys.
Thank you. If you think of questions, we're doing the panel, right? We can answer that during.